Thank you everyone for joining in. I think we've had a great day so far. We started at 9 o'clock with Manish doing the opening for us and setting the context for today's event. We, after much deliberation, we decided that yes, the topic of today's set of discussion should be unemployed India is not a free India. I mean, it is unemployed India is still an independent India, but it's not a free India. And that's essentially the broad theme. Just to give a background for all of you who probably are not aware about what is this Putting India Back to Work initiative, I think late March, April, we started this series every Tuesday, 11 to 12:30. We've been talking to experts. This pandemic has taken all of us by surprise, and we don't really know how to predict the future. And we were trying to rely on collective conversations to figure out the way forward. And I think it turned out into a bigger initiative than we ourselves had envisaged. So we've had more than, I think we've had representations from across 23 odd industries, experts, CEOs, CFOs, CHROs coming in and sharing with us what they have been doing. First, how to keep their employees safe. And of course, for the last 15 odd conversations have been around how do we get people back to work? And how do we get people, first, how do we create more work? And how do we get people back to work? So I think on that note, we felt that let's have deliberations because of course the situation is quite grim. And I do have a extremely enviable panel of experts. And to be honest, each one of today's panelists have played a role of a mentor in many ways in terms of the learnings that I have had from them. I've known most of you for a very long time. And I think the kind of learnings that I've had from my interaction with you is probably the reason that in this conversation, I wanted all of you together. With Mr. Maira, I think my association with him goes back to the days that he was with the Planning Commission. I remember pretty much as a rookie one day, I walked into his office requesting him that, Mr. Maira, can I please invite you to be the keynote speaker and chief guest for this federation that we are trying to put together called the Indian Staffing Federation. And that's how I think it's almost maybe a decade that I walked into his office. So that's how it is. Vijayji, I know because he's obviously a very prolific trade union leader. He's a general secretary of BMS, Bharatiya Mazdoor Sangh. And the reason I think I've been able to connect with him is because he's one of those very balanced and progressive trade union leaders that I have come across. And it always, that's why is a pleasure. I mean, he brings in a very well thought out perspective, and it always helps strike a balance in our conversation. Mr. Sriram, I think, is quite iconic in the sphere of human resource, and the widespread of work that he has done, and the way he views the subject that of human resource and how human resource essentially dovetails into creating business benefits. It's fascinating. As a matter of fact, because of him, I was interested to go up and pick up, or at least learn a little bit of Python. And it's because of Mr. Sriram. I remember he told me that in one of the conversations that I think one of the skills that we all should pick up is that how do we code using Python? So I think that's, I credit that to Mr. Sriram. And Mr. Unnikrishnan, I think I met Mr. Unnikrishnan first in a CII event. I think it was in Delhi. And again, you know, I think I'm incredibly lucky to have met some of you at very early in my career and life. And because of which you've helped me shape, you've also brought in diversity in my thought. And hence, I mean, he's one of those very grounded individuals that I know. And it's always a pleasure. That's why, Mr. Unnikrishnan, to have you amongst us. And Hari, of course. I mean, I do mean it when I say Hari is the flavor of the moment. I think I can assure you that Hari is well versed with every video um, meeting tool that is available today under the planet Earth, because he's a very busy man. He's very sought after because of his views and thoughts, and he's representative of New India, a tech-driven New India. And that is how I know, because that's how I have been interacting with him, and I had a pleasure of learning a lot because of the world that he represents. So I think I have a very diverse panel, as you can see. And I'm hoping we will have an extremely engaging conversation. So just to set the context, since independence, India's capital has been handicapped without labor, and our labor has been handicapped without capital. So we started changing that in 1991, but we have a lot of pre-existing conditions. For the last 20 years, I think we had premature celebration of our development. We still have 45% of our labor force working on farms, and they only generate about 14% of our GDP. So the farm to non-farm transition has been dysfunctional. 88% of our workforce still remains informal. 80% of our manufacturing happens in organization employing less than 50 people. We'll still have only 15,000 companies with paid up capital over rupees 10 crore. And on an average, an overwhelming 120 million labor migrate outside of their states in search of jobs. We've seen the consequences of all of this through the pandemic. So the virus reminds us that per capita GDP matters more to citizens than total GDP. We've been celebrating GDP for a long time, which is very important. We crossed UK in 2018. We crossed France in 2019. In the next few years, we'll cross Japan and Germany. So the only two countries ahead of us will be US and China. But in per capita GDP, there are 138 countries ahead of us. And per capita GDP should actually make our young people, our young men, women angry. And they should be actually saying, listen, this is high time and we really need to fix it. So India is inadequately formalized, inadequately industrialized, inadequately financialized, inadequately urbanized, and inadequately skilled. So these are not problems that have been created by the coronavirus. I know we are blaming everything in it onto it these days, but these are problems that have not been created by the virus. But hopefully, the virus will create the condition that the political, socio-political economy needs to change all of these. It's a tragedy that the coronavirus, COVID-19 has happened at a human level, but hopefully this is for India the no choice. Coronavirus leaves us no choice for India but to change. And that's why I have all of you today to share first and foremost. Sorry, I have a plane flying over. I always celebrate and pause because planes, aircrafts, airports have become, rare. So anyway, so I think I do have this, all of you today. So I would probably, just for you to give your opening remarks and share with us, what is your thought, firstly around the theme and a broad direction from where we can carry on today's conversation. So Mr. Maira, I'll start with you.
Ritu, thank you. When you walked into my office and the Planning Commission, you, just by introducing yourself and what you were creating, you said the Staffing Federation, just intrigued me. I mean, the word Staffing Federation. And then you explained to me what you were doing. And I said, look, you are the institutional solution for our problem. We have capital and employers who don't want to be having the headache of getting people in and throwing them out. And there's some pool, some pot into which these poor people should be able to go, in which they could be nurtured further, developed further for the next assignment that they get. And I asked you that question. Are you just a labor contractor? Or what do you mean by being a staffing federation? You remember that, okay? And then you had the meeting of the staffing federation and we asked ourselves, what is the service that we provide society? Are we just people handling the labor market, as it were? So people who are in the market do that, the supply and the demand, and we just make connections and take a cut in between. So no, we add value. And so you said, remember, that we'll have some standards for those that we'll admit into the staffing federation. And that thereafter, we might say, okay, the Contract Labor Act is fine, contract labor practices are fine, provided you take your people only from members of this staffing federation. Now I'm bringing this up again because you used, again, as always, you say things and you make me think. You said, we have been since 1991, capital has been handicapped without labor, and labor has been handicapped without capital. Capital has been handicapped without labor. And I remember around the same time that you and I met, there were people coming to me from Bangalore, from the industries that were growing in Bangalore, saying we got a talent crunch. So I said, what do you mean by a talent crunch? They say, you know, we're making these big investments and starting these enterprises, and they're not enough Indians with talent for their jobs. So I said, my goodness, in a country in which we've got maybe, as you're saying again, underemployed, not employed, hundreds of millions of people, more than any other country in the world, it seems to me that you're fishing in the wrong pond. You're not going out into the sea. And you're fearful of going out into the sea because you don't know how to fish in the sea. You need to pick people up where they are, how they are, and develop them to suit your requirements. You need to perhaps adjust what you do so that the fish in the sea find you an attractive and a useful place to be in. So it's the shifting the other way. Labor was being handicapped by capital which didn't know how to bring in people, nurture people, and develop people. So this is a mindset that I want to just lay out again. And I know it's not yours, but this is a general mindset I find that the problem seems to be people say that the labor is not equipped in our country for our requirements. But whose job is that? To make the labor equipped for your requirements. It's the government's job? Okay, then let's do the skilling as we've tried to do. And we realize in the skilling, as you know, and you've been saying yourself too, that look, people just can't be skilled offline. They got to do work on which they learn and adjust themselves to the exact nuances of what the work requires, and therefore, thereby having productivity. You can have a set of skills and be certified, but that doesn't make you a productive member of a system to do this. So this is where I'm coming in right now, that we at this time, after this pandemic particularly, have to rethink our basic paradigm of the relationship between those who have the capital and therefore can create places for people to work, and those who are really, really needing good places to work. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Maira. Mr. Unnikrishnan, I'll bring you in. Your opening remarks and thoughts for us.
Well, I totally agree with Mr. Arun, Maira. Taking on further, I'm not negative in my mind about what has happened for the past 70 odd years, on account of the fact that prior to that is what I'll be a little more concerned about. When the world developed, industrialization took place. Industrialization is the only way you can have per capita income going up. Ritu, I have to tell you about that also. Because even in India, currently, the average land holding is 1.3 acres per person, the last year's number. And the average income per acre in the country is ranging between 60,000 for pure agriculture and 110,000 for specialized agriculture. So you're talking about, in any case, $800 to $1,200 per acre is a possibility of an income. So how can you have only with your own number, I'm taking 50% remaining in agriculture to compete with the rest of the world to have your per capita income going to $10,000, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000. So migrating, training the labor with skills needed into two areas. One is industrialization, which will also follow service industry, is something which we need to be attempting. But how others succeeded and why we have not succeeded so far is, I'm very clear about the fact that prior to independence, 200 years, we were a colony for multiple people. Prior to that, we were empires of different nature. So we bypassed the entire industrialization era of the world. So what we achieved in the past 75 years is quite good. I mean, I'm not telling marvelous. It's quite okay for, And unfortunately, only thing that we really achieved is tripling our population post-independence. 1947, 43 crore Indian population has gone to 135 to 140 right now. That at least we succeeded. So remaining as a democracy, okay, one of the finest democracies still alive in the world in every possible way, and industrializing, moving, and service industry picking up, I would say we have achieved certain things, but we have got a big problem in front of us. We need to resolve that. And we may not have time available, but coronavirus is forcing us to think out of the box. And I'm sure all of us are now realizing that there is an Indian way of growing the economy faster in a different way is my take to start on with. A lot is being thought not only by all of us, including the government also, since I'm part of some of the task forces which are currently discussing. Government is busy thinking about what are we going to do post this corona period. Maybe we are talking about an 18 months down the line, and with the trade war already on, and we are also part of that. I think we are live streaming into the proper global trade, which means global economy. We are at 3%, 3.2% of the global economy is Indian trade. I mean, Indian part in the global trade is only 3% for a population of 17.5% of the global population. So we going from 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 in the global trade, simultaneously also doing what Hari and company are doing for India. The domestic market plus international is a growth opportunity for the country, and I'm very positive about that. India will make use of it. And we need to debate further on how do we do that. And we need to do it together. That's my first part of the talk. I'm very positive.
As usual, Mr. Krishnan. So that always helps to strike the balance. Brijesh ji, over to you. I mean, you bring in the absolutely, you bring a different perspective to this debate. You are the representative of the workers of this country. And hence, tell us your perspective to this discussion. I mean, what would your opening remarks be?
Thank you, Rituji. Actually, we were very shocked and pained immediate after lockdown, the situation emerged on the streets. We were thinking what kind of development has taken place in this country. Wealth is going up at many times now. And the people, they are immediate after lockdown, they are on surface. What happened? What model of development should be there? And thankfully, it is agriculture. Again, means after this pandemic, it is agriculture which has spared us. Otherwise, we could have seen number of deaths because of hunger. So after 75 years or more of independence, our blind rush to industrialization, industrialization could not save even a single minute. That concept could not survive. This is agriculture which has saved. So again, we are at the stage where the model of development today, the thought of development today, whether it should continue, whether it has relevance or not, that needs to change. Another thing, I was again shocked to see that the entire country was looking towards state. State should come forward and see what to do. Means the social actors and many others, I was very surprised and looking with all pain that we had been the society-driven state, society-driven country. How suddenly in these few years we have become totally dependent upon states, whereas never in the history we have seen that the state would come forward to shape the society. So again, a strengthening society, we find it is more needed than earlier any time. And the next one is very simple, this one. The entire thought process going on. I have seen number of webinars during these days, and this is the very prominent content being discussed everywhere. Again, I find there are very few who are having connect with the ground realities. Again, economics books are being decoded and certain other ideas are being brought to the surface. Nobody is trying to understand the hard reality of the Indian workforce, their skill, their talent. social demography and all other things. So a entire new paradigm needs to look into overcome from all the situations. We can overcome. I'm not hopeless. I am not lost the hope. We can overcome because we are a human driven society. Still, we have maximum human power to make over to do anything. But the focus, the attention of the state, the society, many those who are involved in the policy making to see the things from the basic, from the ground. Otherwise, development, growth, GDP based development will have the same fate, and the ground reality, the hard fact will remain the different one. So very inclusive and conclusive ideas needs to brought to understand, to having connect with the ground fact of this country, human being, their needs, their talent, their requirement. A lot needs to know, which so far to my knowledge have not been attended so far. So this I need with all hope that because churning is already on. So as I told, there are few I'm getting connected and I'm getting a lot of inspiration from them also. There are still few who are looking to the ground reality. But again, I'm saying to say it's a very sorry affair. Many those who are very renowned experts in the field, they are decoding their economic books, theories, philosophies. That has not worked, that will not work. This is my assumption. A new way, a new means, a new paradigm needs to be found out. With this, I think this is this one. Thank you.
Thank you, Vijayji. Mr. Sriram, you are representative of a sector which has played a very important role in nation building. I mean, you represent the traditional sector of the country. Of course, now your company has diversified beyond the traditional sector. But let's hear from your perspective about about the current situation and about the way forward. Some opening remarks from your side.
Thank you. I'll stick to the format of transition, transcend, and transform, which is what I saw in the email. And before I come into what it looks like an L&T, which I'm sure your questions will cover, you asked us to do a little background kind of preamble, and therefore I'll share those thoughts. Firstly, I'm extremely excited. I'm very, very excited. I think in spite of the skeptical side of myself, once in a way questioning what's happening, I think be it the code of wages, be it the national education policy, be it the kind of reforms the government is trying to do in various facets, I think whether it's Make in India or Atmanirbhar or whatever, I think we're going through a revolution. So point one is, since you asked us to talk about the next decade, which is 2020 to 2030, I think we're going to get used to change in a big way. And I think the change is not the kind of change we used to talk about VUCA in the seminars that we ran together, and we used to talk about it in the cozy environment of a 5-star conference room. Today, I think it's become a reality. So transition. I think things like work from home, things like gig workers, things like neo-gig workers are all terms that are going to become a part of life as we get into the next decade. And while, of course, there are controversies like in anything else about some of these initiatives which organizations are trying to do, I think it's going to become a reality in times to come, and corporates are going to jump into it because in a very, very difficult world, this seems to be one option. I mean, let's remember JCPenney is almost on the verge of closure. Let's remember some of the biggies in United States are, almost belly up. And the same thing applies for some of the big companies in India in terms of not closing or not in terms of being belly up, but they're under pressure. So therefore, cost pressure is going to be very, very important. The second prediction that I have in terms of transition is we're going to get used, we have to get used to having shortages of skilled manpower. We're going to have those shortages because skilled manpower is going to have a terrific premium, and the law of demand and supply is going to apply. Even today, as I speak to you, if you look at projects, and I will also look at Mr. Unnikrishnan in the picture, the skilled workers have gone back, and it's difficult to get them back. I mean, whether it is, and they are not the types who are lured there by Manrega and stuff, which is 2 months salary for building a road and stuff. But I think as a phenomena, skilled workers, and what that skill means, for me, it means specifically in the manufacturing sector. And of course, the services sector, including what T.N. Hari represents, is very, very important in my life and in what I'm going to say. But I think India has missed the bus once by giving way to countries like Vietnam, Taiwan, and so on in the export game. And I think it's time now that we transcend into a new economy which is export oriented. Mr. Unnikrishnan did talk about that. Germany is way, way above us. China, of course, has always been. And there are many other, I mean, we don't have to look at those countries which are outside this continent. We need to look at our own continent. And you have Taiwan and Vietnam and so on. In Transform, I think what I see is digitization is going to take a new high. I'm very excited because right from our maids who use Arogya Setu to your payment gateways. I mean, your Sabjiwala takes money on Google Pay and Paytm and stuff. And I think we are doing very well. I mean, you see TV clips of this lady who's garlanding flowers, who says, I'm saving money for a smartphone for my kid to get into, to study and to not miss out on classes. I just think we are a very resilient, very, very tough-minded kind of a society, and we have the ability to bounce back. Security of data in the next decade is going to be a huge issue. And when I say security of data, even inadvertently, whether it is someone collecting your Arogya Setu data and that going into avenues and lanes which are inadvertently not supposed to. I mean, there is a big amount of data people are going to sit on, and I think it's very important to parse the data very responsibly and deal with the data very, very well. Climate change in the next decade is not a passing cloud in the monsoons of Mumbai. It's a very, very serious issue. And I think we just can't have drawing room talk to talk about what we should do with it. I think all of us need to rally around. And I think in the next 10 years, which is the next decade, there will be a huge amount of anxiety and concern about it, not just from the idealistic younger generation, but even some of the older people. There is a lot of polarization going on as we speak, of nations, of states, of countries, and so on. I think what is important is to get back to understanding the meaning and the import of collaboration, whether it is getting a vaccine or whether it's fighting COVID or whatever it is. My prediction is urbanization may reduce as compared to earlier. There was a lot of pressure of, including in your narration in your email, of a lot of people from villages wanting to come to urban areas. Might be that is going to change. In the 80s and in the 70s, and as I grew into my career in the 90s, and the TQM movement and the quality movement in our country was very, very, very celebrated and extremely important. I don't know what happened to it in the way. Maybe it just sort of fizzled out. It was reduced to posters on the wall saying customer is king and stuff. I think whether it is the 7 tools of Deming or whether it is Juran or whatever, there is going to be a resurgence of TQM if we have to make it in the Make in India race. And I think it's very important that we do that. Finally, I think organizational orthodoxies are going to be shed. If they're not shed, then we are going to be like dinosaurs. And you introduced me as an icon. Thank you very much. Icons can also be in a museum. So it's very important that we are alive to that kind of stuff. And finally, before I hand over the mic back to you, to Mr. Hari, I want to quote from a favorite paragraph, which all of you have heard over and over again. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light, it was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope, it was the winter of despair. We had everything before us, we had nothing before us. We were all going direct to heaven, we were all going direct the other way. In short, the period was so far like the present period that some of the noisiest authorities insisted on its being received for good or for evil in the superlative degree of comparison alone. The tale of the two cities tells.
Yes, thank you. That's why I think I am right in the most enviable spot, because I have all of you. I really can just relax now. So over to Hari, and I really mean it. He is the flavor of the moment because he's seen it all. He has seen demand getting tripled or 4 times of what it was before COVID. He has seen suddenly his existing workforce disappearing because of fear of the pandemic. He's also seen how creatively you can mobilize back. So he's experienced it all. He has a first-hand experience of reverse migration and its impact. He has seen demand surging, and for others, COVID was a bane, but for him it was a boon. So over to you, Hari. Now what from here on?
Thanks, Ritu. So I think what I'll do is the first couple of minutes, I will just share my views on the pandemic itself, restrict my views there, and subsequently during the discussion share my thoughts on the reforms and policies, what's working, what's not working. I think all of us have no doubt that we are living through a historic time. I think none of us are likely to ever experience such a thing again in our lifetime, not more than once in anyone's lifetime. And I think the crisis is a bit unique. It's not like any of the financial crises that we've seen in the past. 1997, the Asian currency crisis, 9/11, we had one, 2008. I think financial crisis, the problem is well understood and the solutions are also well understood. So governments have a playbook, the central banks have a playbook, which is unleashed the moment the crisis like that sets in. But this is a bit of a medical crisis. Nobody knows what's likely to happen. A lot depends on whether a vaccine would get developed or wouldn't get developed. If it does get developed, how long would the immunity last? Would it last for 3 months? Would it last for 3 years? I think those are big questions, and the answers to some of those questions will really determine how the whole thing unfolds. And nobody really knows at this point of time, while everybody's speculating. I think, history has a way of springing surprises at all of us, and, springing new surprises every time. And sometimes springing the same old surprise on a new generation. So I think history has taught us, that you can't be prepared for a crisis. History has just taught us that, a crisis will always be a bit of a surprise. So I think preparedness based on what has happened is always going to be difficult, because every time we are likely to be surprised again. And I think in the beginning, all of this lockdown, the crisis, was a bit novel. Work from home was novel. So everybody was just observing it. But I think now it's very, very evident the economic devastation that this is causing, across the globe, across India, I think is very palpable. The migrant labor trekking back to their homes from cities like, Hyderabad, Bangalore, Mumbai, and different urban agglomerations of India back to hometowns in Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Orissa was very tragic. It actually became the face of the COVID crisis in India. And I think gradually you're seeing that entire industries are being decimated. The entire travel industry is going through a massive crisis. I think Make My Trip is the only one that may survive with its market cap already down to half of what it was pre-COVID. Restaurant businesses are all shutting. Entertainment is being redefined. Education is being redefined. And in a way, a lot of the trends are getting accelerated. In fact, there's something like a work from home. It required a pandemic to teach the world that work from home was a real possibility for most of us, at least the white collar staff. And we didn't need to trek 2 hours to bad traffic to get to a place called office just to be able to work together. So I think a lot of lessons are being taught to us very quickly. A lot of new normals, as people would say, are being rewritten, redefined. We don't know how many of these new normals would endure and how many would revert back to what it was pre-crisis. I think whenever a crisis like this happens, people who go through the trouble, some people are positively impacted, as you mentioned. For us, it's been a tailwind, but it's been a headwind for several other industries, several individuals. I think they will go through a massive pain. It is the governments have to step in at some points like this and try and make the landing a bit soft. So soft landing for the affected, stakeholders, affected, communities and groups is what the government needs to do. And I think they're doing a good chunk of that. And the last point that you made was very interesting. Can India, ever be independent, remaining unemployed? Yeah, of course not. I think independence can be seen from many perspectives and many connotations for independence. Can you have independence with inequality, independence with, a non-level playing field? Can you have independence with this kind of discrimination? You can't, obviously. So I think we're all working on all of these things. Things are getting better by the day. And I think things can get much better. So for example, in 1978, India and China were at the same, level. The population was the same, the per capita income was the same, and the GDP was the same. But today, just about 20 plus 22, which is 40 years later, China is almost 5 times our GDP and therefore 5 times our per capita income. So what did they do differently? Why did we get stuck? What did we do wrong? 1991, we unleashed some reforms, but why didn't they take root? Why do we take 2 steps forward and 3 steps backwards? These are some questions that I'd really like to comment upon during the subsequent sections, Ritu.
Thank you very much. As you can see that the discussions have warmed up. Mr. Unnikrishnan has also brought in his cup of tea and he's getting settled in. On this note, I would encourage all attendees that I'm sure a lot of questions are popping up in your mind. So please do posting them in the Q&A tab. I move on to the next phase of my questions. I think pre-COVID, during COVID, we don't know when there will be a post-COVID. So a lot of transitions are happening around us. And this specific question I have for Mr. Maira, for Mr. Unnikrishnan, and I also would like to ask the same question to Rajeshji. What do you see? I mean, what are some of these transitions that we should expect in the political, the social, and the economic landscape? And how do you think some of these transitions are likely to happen? Mr. Maira, you want to start?
Thank you. Transitions in the way we think. I can see them happening, but we need to make them happen much faster. We've talked about people, as the previous speakers have said, about VUCA, and as Mr. Hari has pointed out, that we are into a type of change which we haven't experienced. We, at least in our generations, haven't experienced. It might have happened 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago. We haven't experienced. So the way we have about thinking of how to handle a change and what would be solutions that we would implement as we change, we are already saying things like new normal. We are going past VUCA, as he said. What will be the new normal? We've got to change our way of thinking, otherwise we will not find the solutions for a world which we do not know. And I come back to therefore quoting Albert Einstein, and you must have heard him, and everybody hears him too much about, if you are trying to solve a problem which has not been solved presently with the same thinking with which you've tried to solve the problem in the past, you must be mad. So why is it that in spite of the best thinkers, best policies and economists applying their minds to making India what it has become, but they didn't want it to be this, they wanted it something else, are we going to be persisting with the same economics? And this is where my good teacher, Vijeshji, who keeps saying, listen to the people on the ground, listen to reality. And so we have to start again with reality, new economics, which is based on reality. So I go back to quoting an economist who in the late 1960s, early 1970s, I forget exactly, E.F. Schumacher, who wrote this books on economics. And in one of them, it's really masterful, where he said, then we are facing the twin evils of unemployment and mass migration. Now you'd say, how did he notice this? We only noticed this after COVID and say, my goodness, suddenly all these migrants around, they were around all the time. Unemployment was around all the time. We didn't realize that we were quite comfortable sitting inside the bus of the economic growth, thinking that we are very comfortable $1 trillion, $2 trillion, $5 trillion GDP on that meter in front of the bus and telling the government, press the accelerator harder. The reason why India is not growing as fast as China is we haven't moved as fast on the reforms that we economists are advising you must make. China was doing something quite different actually. And therefore you have to look into that. And this some of us did and say, let's be open. Let's see, why is it? This is a good learning. Why is it that we are not producing the results that we wanted to get? Let's open up, and we shouldn't persist with saying the same thing that we have been saying for a long time. So in that, just one more thing Schumacher said in that. He said that the developing countries are adopting a model of development which is based on $1,000 equals one job. $1,000 of capital is required to produce one modern scale job. Whereas they are short of capital and they're surplus in labor. They've got to find development models, production models, which are $1 capital for one job. Just change your mind where you're getting the solutions from and what you're thinking of as the criteria for a good solution. So I'm going to name 4 challenges which economists are confronting, and fortunately, they're coming to the fore. But I'm finding the resistance from the old paradigm. And another person, Thomas Kuhn, who said many years ago, the structure of scientific revolutions. And of course, he was talking of the natural sciences, but people like Einstein, who was able to change a complete paradigm of mechanics and based on, physics based on Newton's mechanics towards, relativity and uncertainty and all these other paradigms that came up. He says the old will resist the new because they've got their grandeur, their positions, their respect in society based on those old ideas. Okay, so in economics, there's a struggle going on right now, which is also related, therefore, to public policy, because for the last 30 years, at least in our country, economists have been guiding public policy. When we were in the Planning Commission, we asked the World Bank, what's the difference in the way China plans and we plan? They said they got more engineers doing planning. You have all economists. In fact, you're the country with the largest number of economists in planning next to the United States, right? Or ahead of the United States. So, and we learn our economics from there too. So you come to here are 4 points I'm going to make. First is labor markets. I already made the point. You cannot treat labor as a commodity, just like you would have to treat anything in a market. That there's a price for it, there's a buyer for it, there's a seller for it, and you create a situation in which people can transact very easily. Yeah. So make it easy to be shed when you don't need it, and hopefully easy for someone to find a job if they were to need it. But this is not working in labor economics anywhere in the world. So the idea of labor being in a market, and therefore all the time saying the labor market is not working, I find it obnoxious. And I know Virjeshji, you do too, you said it yesterday again. It's the only human labor that is sold in a market is slave labor. Slaves used to be sold. Human beings cannot be. Their lives cannot be put into a market for money. Okay, 1. 2, productivity. We've used the notion that productivity is invariably measured as output per person, per worker. In countries which are short of labor, it's a very necessary way to think about the productivity of the system, because a scarce resource is persons. If you want the productivity, the whole system to improve, you must see how much I can get more out of the scarcest resource that I have, which is, I think, good managers, engineers, and Uni, and others, all the others, I think, here, yourself also, if you would know this. In our country, labor is not the scarce resource. So why are we trying to improve the productivity per unit of labor? And I come back to Schumacher again. It has to be a different strategy. Our scarcity is capital. And therefore, how much total systems output can we get per unit of capital is the way we must think. And it's very hard to change this in economics when they don't examine where their concepts are relevant and where they are not. But now, unfortunately, Sam, I'm glad that many economists are challenging how industrialization progressed. It never progressed by opening up the market, never, ever. It progressed by people nurturing the capabilities of enterprises within their societies, within their countries. And that did involve sort of fending off the competition from people who were unfairly positioned at that time compared to yourself. Human beings can learn, they can change capabilities. If you talk about competitive advantage a la pure math, like Ricardo, then you would say, well, if you produce port wine better, then you just keep producing port wine. If you produce textiles better, keep producing textiles. But we are in a country, we say we need to produce many things which we don't know how to produce now. And unless we produce those things, we won't have enough stuff for ourselves and nothing for us to export either. Because we've not got oil underground and basing our economy on how to use oil like Saudi Arabia can and have refineries and chemical plants. We would have to say how to use people more effectively to create industrial models as well as economic models which are based on the use of the most abundant resource. And I'm saying it's not a burden, the most abundant resource that we have, which is human beings, and they have the ability to learn and to perform. So Srinath mentioned very well what happened to the TQM movement. I just only was looking at old photographs, tidying up we have time in COVID to tidy up our old cupboards. And I found a photograph of Rohit Naga and myself, both looking very young and dashing, I must say, launching the chapter of the TQM society in India, the Quality Circle movement in India, in Pune. It was one of the first, or the first in the country actually, right, at that time, and talking in the 1970s. Yes, at that time the attitude was, and it should remain, I hope, for everybody, that the people are the appreciating assets. If you engage them and give them the tools to improve your system, they learn, they become very productive assets and improve the productivity of the whole system, which was the Japanese way. And in that way, people are not thrown out and brought in. They have to remain because the knowledge they gain, they will build on that. It becomes tacit, and then you build and you build and you build. So Japan was a machine that changed the world and conquered the world in export markets. Germany has always had this relationship with its workers. You are not allowed to let them go. In fact, the state will support you to train them if you keep them in employment during the sessions, and they've done it now also. Okay, so you're investing in people as the only appreciating assets that any enterprise can have. Your buildings will depreciate, your machines will depreciate, even the IP, there'll be contest against it, it will depreciate in value. The people are the only people, if they are inspired to, taken care of, and together you aspire to, you can create very world-class enterprises. So the engine of growth of our country is not going to be outside. It's not going to be global markets. The time that Japan grew, Korea, and then China has grown, it was the era of markets shall be open for various reasons, ideological reasons, as well as physically. Yes, you could have logistics change all over the world. Now, it's not possible for the next few years. For geopolitical reasons, markets will not be open like they used to be. And for physical reasons, for quite a while, they will not be as open as they were. And meanwhile, people will be finding solutions like Hari is for local supply webs. And we may not need to have global supply chains as much as we needed them before. So India's solution for finding demand for its people's products when they produce them will have to be India. India will be the engine of growth for itself and maybe the next engine of growth for the world if India becomes a large market. If Indians earn and can spend, then investors in India, Indian investors or foreign investors, will find the market. But they will have to earn to produce what is demanded immediately around them in the web of India itself. So I'm not talking protectionism, I'm talking system science. The time has come for us to think about systems which always have roots locally and form locally and become larger and larger. Okay, the different way of thinking of how to organize, which was another very interesting point that you made about organization orthodoxies. Very nicely said. I think we've got a theory of how one organizes, global, theory of top-down, theory of transactions. And this is our thoughts of how we organize. Change it to relationships, change it to localities, change it to communities, and you can think of a very different concept of organization, which, by the way, we were encouraging in our constitution. Mahatma Gandhi had said, quite rightly so, that in your country, we must have an economics which is giving freedom to the people. Local production for local needs. And he wasn't talking about public sector enterprises. He hated that. People must be owners of what they do and what they produce. So it was local enterprises owning their own means of production, selling to markets around them and getting served by those markets. Going back in a way to Adam Smith, the butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker. He was also, Adam Smith, talking about a local community, which is a healthy social community, he mentioned. You can maintain morality and ethics when you can see the person you're selling to and buying from. That's where trust comes. When you go to these very, very big things, you've got lawyers and all sorts of things. And even today, coming to the extent it had come, that investors shall have a right to sue a national government in some court. I mean, how dare you? I mean, this is a government of the people and by the people, democratically representing them. How can you take this government to court when you feel, you as a remote investor with money parked in some Cayman's Island, feel that your interests are being affected? I'm saying the world was being run by these ideas. Now these challenges are coming. Now these challenges are coming. Which side shall we be on? I'm saying this. The side of the people who didn't have it so good so far, or my side or our side, we've had it pretty good so far. Thanks.
So, I was told that if you're the smartest person in the room, you've really chosen the wrong room. I definitely haven't chosen the wrong room. It's clear to me. So I'm conflicted between my moderation role and that of a student, because when I hear Mr. Maira speaking, I have so much notes that I have to take that I sometimes I get a little distracted. Yes, now on to you, Mr. Unnikrishnan. I think he gave us a lot of food for thought. Where do you see? I love the concept of human beings and employees or labor being treated as an asset and an appreciating asset. I want to hear from your perspective that you are the one who is representative of the employers of the country, and so what are your thoughts? What do you think will now change or should change, and how do you expect those transitions and changes to happen across, again, the political environment, the social environment, and the economic environment?
So let me start on with a two-line diagnosis of the problem, and then maybe some solutions to start with. See, we started as a post-independence, a socialistic republic. And at some point in time, when we almost became bankrupt, decided to become capitalistic. That transition we did not manage. Now we are talking about coronavirus transition. The economic transition and the political transition is something where we've gone wrong. A normal ways with socialism, you will have the fundamental, the bottom of the pyramid in the aspiration: food, shelter, clothing, taken care for the population and for the future population. Then you start releasing a little more to become capitalistic or a free market economy. So a controlled economy becoming a free market economy overnight without capital being made available and a highly unprepared population is the main problem of India. Now we live with that for now maybe 29 years, but achieved a lot, may not have achieved anywhere, some areas. So as I started originally also, I'm more positive always, because you got to think about the future. Past learning should be very quickly completed, churn it out, and then move ahead. So what do we need to do going ahead right now? In fact, my heart also bled along with the Brajesh, because we were together at the time when the migration happened and labor migration going on. I don't think there is any rightful Indian would have had any happiness during that time when TVs were switched on. Each one of us, whichever strata that you belong to. What is the reason for it? What we could understand. It is because the exploitation, though I belong to the other side, as you mentioned about managements, the entire construction industry of this country never provided anything proper as an accommodation, food or anything for them. They are making shelters for those who have money and not provided shelter for the people who came from the villages to build those buildings for them. Similarly, in the MSME, which you mentioned about, that only 10% of Indian industry is organized. Unorganized sector is a predominant part of the Indian industrialization history, or the truth is that, and they never took care of the labor. That is why you had the migration. But can migration be stopped? No, because let me make it very clear. The way we created 70 years of our economic advancement is centralized economy, which means we created factories in locations and cities grew around that. And the rural people migrated initially for 1,000 rupees. Today, the first migration is 3,000, then to 5,000 to 8,000 to 18,000 to metro cities away, various stages, tier 1, 2, 3 to mini metro to main metro happening. It cannot be prevented, whether you like it or not, unless otherwise we are able to have a distributed economy model created. Impossible for 1.35 billion, which will become 1.7 billion or 1.6 billion in the next 25, 30 years, impossible to immediately create a distributed economy. So it can be a via media only. In such a situation, solution number one is where all of us do agree, and we are working with Mr. Brajesh Upadhyay, we work together on that one, to create a social security mechanism. Because we failed already. By the natural process of transition of economy, we should have created and moved into capitalistic or uncontrolled or free market economy. So we need to have the social security created. In fact, Corona has created one more problem. The people whom we took out of poverty, as part of them have gone back. So the basket size for creating a social security has got to go up. And that social security doesn't have to be done by companies which are represented by Yogi or me or anybody. We already have. In fact, that's an area where over-securitized, I would say that, unionism in the country. Sorry, Brajesh may not agree with me, but I'm very clear about the fact that organized industry in the country is very well securitized. The unorganized sector, those who are below poverty line, the security system has got to be created, and we need to pay for it. You cannot do everything in one day. We were working very privately. Mr. Maira was managing all that with all of us noisy characters for almost a year and a half, and recommendations are going to the government. We cannot have a total, say, warm to maybe symmetry social security provision which is available to the rich countries in our country. How are the fundamental basic needs of hunger prevention, so that you don't go without food and without a shelter for you, is the first level of security to be taken care of. This should take maybe 2 decades for us to create it. That's a necessity. Then only you are a question about independence. I mean, without employment, are you independent or not? I mean, otherwise, what society are you? You're a nomadic society. So that is the first answer we need to be creating, and nobody should oppose that. No pressures and powers and politics or economics should not. So once that is provided, your next level of advancement, a multiple hybrid model is what is needed for a country. We need to ensure that, like Mr. Maira mentioned about internal consumption, we are a consuming economy. 65% of our economy is internal consumption. So that alone is going to be growing. And how do we take care of that? Though there, I'm not for protectionism, but when others are wanting to protect their employment and livelihood, you need to protect your people's livelihood also. For that, a governance and policy network has got to be there for a medium period, long term not needed. So that is internal consumption orientation looking. We also did some major blunders. I'm sorry to say that way. When the world is forgetting World Trade Organization, WTO is almost on the deathbed, like UN may become day after tomorrow. WHO is almost dead. It is going to happen to WTO, then UN will happen that way. It is going to be the blocks which are going to get formed. And see, everybody is attracted to our market, going to be, not, India is not a big market today. It's going to be one of the largest market in the world in the future. So people are willing to come over here. So how do we associate with countries? A very simple thing to talk about. See, how a leveler was available with the oil exporting countries and India. They gave you oil and you send human beings from here. Ritu, this is a word, in fact, we are discussing currently with the government. Human is not a resource. It's a possibility. I also agree with you. But there are sectors of the world, pockets of the world, there is no population available who are of working age. And they also need, but they don't need a factory worker. They may be needing somebody to be at somebody's home for a couple who 80 years, how to look after somebody at their old age. Medical services, if we are to add it upon, India should be able to export capable, vocationally trained human beings who are from the lower strata of society, who can look after other human beings, not less than a couple of million. The number to me is equal to 18 million, but okay, I'm telling you, if you take a couple of them to start on with, you will be able to have that kind of an agreement started on. Then you're India providing job for, on an average, maybe 1 crore of people in a year. That's the kind of number of Indians going to come to the job market. Impossible. Let's forget about that. We don't need so many people to be working in the country. So we need to look at possibilities of this. And I agree, they are not a commodity, but they are a resource and a possibility. A resource for the less educated, but they have to be vocationally trained. And the next level, the one possibilities are the one who have got intellectual capabilities. And they have to be trained also for the world, the way IT has proved for us. So there is a great opportunity for our country. Population is not a bane of our country. It is a boon, provided we have the right policies, we do train them properly and utilize for our economy and for the world. I truly believe that we have missed the boat of joining the trade blocks. which should have opened a lot more, because the blocks which are open to us have got labor arbitrage negative for them. For example, the entire Europe, we have not been able to sign an FTA with them, but we could sign it up with poor countries where they are wanting to dump items over here, where the average labor cost is $35 in the entire Europe. We have not had a sign up done for it. What could happen to the size of market available? So at least these are the policy changes that we need to making. And then we'll have to take, I'm sorry to say that way, I don't believe in the factor for the next 1 decade that no government will be there and no governance free. No, a country cannot afford that way. We need to have a policy governance done, policy implementation done by the government, and we as good citizens will have to be disciplined to follow that. And one motto for industry for us is create wealth. If you do not create wealth, what you will distribute in this country is only poverty. So that is the most important thing that all of us should be careful, and we need to be ensuring that creation of wealth is supported. Thank you. That's I rest my point over there.
Thank you so much. Vijayji, I will bring you in. You are the representative of India's formal workforce, and hence, from your perspective, given that this is, I view obviously COVID as a opportunity of major transitions. And hence, from your perspective, what are some of these transitions that you're anticipating, whether it's in the social environment, the economic environment, political, and even regulatory for that matter?
I think Mr. Maira has already drawn a road for our discussion further. He has said a lot what actually he used to say. Thanks, Maira ji. Rituji, if you remember, Unni ji, Maira ji, we all had been together prior to this pandemic, and we were trying to address same situation. Pandemic, COVID is a different symptom arises, and it's a temporary one and will eliminate later or sooner. I'm not going to rule, but the problem is different. If one needs to cure the symptom, one has to have a different approach. If you want to cure the cause, definitely you need to have a different approach. So if we are thinking to go into cause, why I am referring, we had been discussing similar transitional issues prior to this pandemic. We all had been engaged together since years together. If I am not wrong to refer, when Maira ji was in Planning Commission, the initiative has been started from that month, sometime in 2011 or 12, we have started discussing, and the situations were similar. Not exactly same terminology, but the symptom, other things. So one has to go and we need to connect ourselves from that perspective to find the solution. And when I involve myself, I devote myself to this, to this one, the economic activity on the earth is to create quality life for human beings. This fundamental has been forgotten, unfortunately. Forgotten or have not given the importance it requires. And that's why in entire world, there is a inequality, there is poverty, there is unemployment, underemployment, all such issues we are addressing. And we are trying to find some patch up some solution to this, and a market recession, all such are emerging because of all this situation. So one have to understand all such things, what are the causes to such situations, and that needs to be addressed. When I enter to this, India is very different. We can't have a uniform economic policy for India. Economic policy, prosperity depends upon the country, geographical, social, also a different parameters exist for the economic well-being of a particular country. So we can't follow China, what China has done, what Europe has done. We are a very different country, very different social fabric, very different geographical, lot of differences we have. So we need to have a tailor-made policy for us, and we are rich enough in manpower, labor surplus. So we should have designed the policy to mobilize the labor, invest the labor, but unfortunately we could not. So we need in these transitions, now ideas are coming, flourishing. what initiatives should be there to find the solution of all such things. So a lot of discussion in the policy making bodies, they are also taking. First time I'm hearing that employment policy is going to come up. After a lot, means we had been discussing industrial policies, this, that, but we are hopefully a group of ministers is set up now, and they are very close. Perhaps we are hopeful we will hear something tomorrow by Prime Minister's speech. So something going to come up for employment policy, respect of employment policy. Employment policy is the real dimension, direction, transition to address this concept. Means ultimately country will find how to employ our people, how to provide livelihood to them. So this is big. Certain new opportunities has emerged because of digital use, digital platforms. It's a reach to the Mr. Yogi was also referring. So I also find it's a very good this one, and it has a very bright future, bright hope in the coming days. So digitalization in this digital literacy drive, which is still missing. I have gone through the entire this digitalized policy of the government, but the focus on digital literacy, the in country, the workforce, even today people, they are having their ATM card, but while they are going to the ATM, they are trying to help someone by please dial my PIN number and get this one. They are unable to do their SMSs number. So this type of population we have, and putting them into total this digital platform. So digital literacy is most required in the form of this much simple, whereas a illiterate people can also understand how digitally they can. Otherwise, the welfare schemes, what is happening to that? Perhaps Yogi was referring a base code is coming up, this Atmanirbhar Bharat. Sir, we have seen after independence, there are hundreds of pro schemes in almost all this one government side. What happened? What fate they are having? Where they have gone down? And there is budgetary allocation. There are person those who are eligible, but even it is not moving on. What's the reason? Having legislation, my 99% problem is non-enforcement of labor laws. And Unniji and we were discussing what is the this shortcoming in these legislation, why it is not being enforced. I, being trade unionist, was trying to understand perspective of the industry, why they are not getting it implemented. So lot of different approach needs to apply to understand the things, to move from one paradigm to another paradigm. So next area is skill, this one. They are working since so many years, and a number of initiative has come up. Yesterday, we have BMS has organized this series, lecture series. I was hearing a gentleman connected to this new education policy. He was talking about this skill. He was referring something, earning while learning. I said, sir, I have a little different thing. You have to propose learning while earning. Earning while learning and learning while learning. One can say it's the same thing, but to me, to a worker, while I'm working, while learning same time, similar time, it has a different meaning to me. But the course designed so far, earning while learning. So a different approach again needed. Otherwise, this vast workforce, this majority, the illiterate, lot of these contradictions are there. So a different approach needed to address all such things. And the next one is this GDP and other approach. Again, I'm trying to refer. If you think total well-being, total development, then you have not to go for GDP-based developmental approach. You have to see whether a common man, whether a common worker, because we are market-driven economy. and market depends upon the purchaser. So who are purchaser? The purchaser hardly getting 10,000, 8,000, these contract workers, whether they can drive the market. When this 7th pay commission report was to come, after every 10, 15 days, I was seeing an analysis in the newspapers that market is waiting for 7th pay commission report. I was wondering and I was trying to understand why. I was asking to media persons, why market is waiting, whether market is going to, no, sir. Government employees get a handsome wages and they get areas, and ultimately market is waiting for them because they invest in the market. So ultimately market depend upon these purchaser and industry otherwise. So this is a cycle. If a producer can't sell its product and its product can't be selling, they are not paying well to their workmen. So it's a chain. When this gratuity was being enhanced 10 lakh to 20 lakh, Prime Minister asked, one cabinet minister told me, Prime Minister, suddenly from 10 to 20 lakh. Then the minister told, sir, where it is going? They will not take that money. Ultimately, this money will be either in the banks or it will go to the market. Okay, do it. So whether these industries, these development cycle, these type of progress, development, GDP, what idea we are having, it is returning back. If it is not returning back, that's why society or the purchaser or the workers are also not returning back into the economy, to the market. And again, market recession is there. Government is trying, bringing many fancy ideas. PF contribution, one can go for 12% to 10%. I ask, why this? No, sir. Take home salary will increase. So you enhance his salary. You are so generous that workers should go with the handsome salary. You enhance his salary. Why? No, he will expand in the market. Ultimately, market needs. So why not these market dynamics lead us things to pay decent wage to the workers? Ultimately, it will get back. First time I heard, even a underwear made in America is available on EMI in remote market. Why? Anyway, my car should come to market, and those who are involved in the system is a cycle, it's a chain. If any part of this chain is weak, no system can get strengthened. So my submission is, we have to see this economy, policy, design, development, putting human into center. Wealth generation, Unniti said, okay, I am very much with him. Wealth generation must go. What about its distribution? At number of seminar, webinars I told, since last 6, 7, about perhaps 10 years, even Pope Francis has started to speak business with ethics, because worldwide economy, wealth is going up, but equally poverty is also going up, unemployment is also going up, inequality is also going up. What is solution to this, gentleman? Wealth, okay, already wealth is going up, number of time it is going up, every year, every quarter it is going up, but the same proportion, the same ratio, poverty, unemployment, solution is also coming. So this blind way, blind approach may not will not work. So make it success, all stakeholders of this economy, the business, the society, the total well-being had to think into balance. Then only this transition, this transformation can be thought. Otherwise, I'm not addressing this pandemic related. It's a symptom, it will go. I'm not worried to this. I'm worried what we have started discussing from 2012 and onward. Even today we are engaged trying to find out. So with this word, I am of this view, a balanced approach needs to be done. Until unless balanced approach is not there, this is not going to get us. For time being, for sort of this type of webinars, we can come out with a solution, with a resolution. That is not going to work. It has not worked. The legislation, the policies of the governments, governance, perhaps Yogi ji was where governance works. Government has totally withdrawn from the governance. There is no question of having governance. So lot of things needs to be visited in the reality, in the sense, really it is happening on the ground or not. So with these words, I think I might have gone some different way, but being at the ground, what I could see, I try to put it. With these words, thank you, Rituji.
I mean, I clearly have underestimated the scope of this discussion from a time perspective, given that this session I had apportioned maximum time, but I feel I've not even crossed the first transition point. Forget transform and transcend. So over to you now, Mr. Sriram and Hari. I think what the same particular subject, and it's probably good for us not to dwell on this subject because itself it's giving us so much insight. That from a business perspective, you are the ones who are best positioned to talk about what's happening at workplaces. So, what are the transitions do you think we should right now be prepared for? Are probably already happening from the perspective of the people landscape, how processes are being dealt and viewed, how technology are being leveraged. And of course, if you want to throw some light on what's already been discussed, I'm happy to hear because I'm conscious we've got just 5 minutes left, so I can't really take much questions. I know Mr. Unnikrishnan also needs to go. So over to you, Mr. Sriram.
In the project management business, it's very difficult to do work from home for everybody. Obviously, you can't build the world's tallest statue in your drawing room or something like that. Or you can't possibly build the Trans Harbor link or the metros and so on. So one of the conundrums that organizations like us face is the fact that if you do introduce things like work from home, then what happens to people who are in factories and projects and so on. So that's so there are a number of enigmatic situations that we're dealing with. Work from home is only one. In organizations like L&T, which is into basically an EPC company, I think we've learned to cope with the new norm quite well. The SOPs are very, very stringently being implemented. Of course, keeping physical distance and things is very, very important, but maintaining physical distance when you're bar bending and stuff is a big challenge. But the way we've gotten around it is that we've digitized many of our processes, and whether it is supply chain or whether it is using IoT, etc. And thanks to a very visionary CEO and MD, and also with the support of the entire executive committee, I think there's a lot of work which is being done in that area. So we're getting back. In spite of the pandemic, we're getting our orders. I think being disciplined in whatever one is doing, even if one is working from home, is very, very important. Being dedicated, disciplined, etc., are good old-fashioned traits which would stand you in a good place in times like this. You haven't asked me this question, but I want to say a few words about the good side of what's happening in terms of the environment. I think the national education policy, which we're reading about, is a real eye-opener, at least for me. I think it's one of the most, if one goes through the policy, and I'm not going to give a tirade now because you said there's 5 minutes only, it's really exciting. I mean, for the first time, students will be given a choice. And being given a choice is being very respectful to our youth. They're moving away from, we've been complaining about rote learning and seminar after seminar and stuff. They're moving away from that. There is a national testing system, which is going to create a statistical spine for the entire organization, for the entire country. I think there is a lot of work being done in terms of vocational training, and coupled with the NAPS, which unfortunately is which is not very well known in industry. I don't know, for some mysterious reason, the marketing of it has been very poor. But NAPS, I think, is another good thing that has happened, with the government is ideating upon and also is trying to implement. NAPS, by the way, includes the services sector, and Mr. Hari will possibly agree that you can leverage NAPS there. 2.5% to 15% of your manpower can be apprentices. And I think whether it is vocational training of them, or even those who have passed 5th standard, or whether it is what is called as optional trades. For the first time, something called optional trades has been introduced. I think these are great moves by the government. But as other speakers have said, I think the trick is in the implementation. For example, the NEP vision stretches from next year all the way to 2035 or something like that. And it's a absolutely it's a fantastic document. I think it's a great vision, and if we're able to implement it, we'll be up there. For us, actually, what we've discovered is that digital learning is something that is a possibility in spite of good teachers who teach in the physical environment, use drama, they use humor, they use animation, and they don't do just chalk talk. They do a lot of, all the histrionics, which are important for engaging your students and stuff. Now that's difficult in with digital media, but all the same, we've realized that anytime learning platforms are extremely valuable in going back to the fundamentals. And in times like this, when students in the past, shrugged off theoretical stuff and conceptual stuff, this is a good time to revisit your theory and your concepts and stuff, because you can go through a YouTube repeatedly to understand about Young's modulus or whatever it is. So I think that there are some good things that are happening. The focus in the NEP has to be on the teacher. Unlike Finland, teaching may or may not be the most respected profession. Finland is the most respected profession. I think it's important, besides medicine and besides investing on medicine, the government has promised that they'll spend 6% of the GDP on education. If that happens, I am very, very upbeat about how the economy is going to look like. Coming back and looping back to L&T in the last two sentences, I think we have decided to keep promises in terms of offers that we've made in the campuses. We're a high governance company, as was mentioned by Brijesh ji and others on the call. We continue to be very, very devoted to what I would call as servant leadership. Servant leadership is bothering more about followers. But for servant leadership is being considerate to your people. Servant leadership is about, it's not being servile, but it's being considerate. And it's a concept of leadership which I think is going to unfold itself a lot more in the years to come, in this decade to come. Because people follow people whom they respect and love, not because of command and control, and not because of executive fiat.
Hari, would you now come in with your perspective from representative of a very, very new sector for all of us?
Yeah. So what I'll do, Ritu, is I'll just talk about three things quickly. One is, broadly the macro job scenario. Also comment on, policies and reforms where my views are more aligned with what Brijesh also said. And maybe I will also try and talk about some emerging trends.
Sure.
So in terms of, the macro perspective on jobs, here's the way I would look at it, right? India, let's assume the $2.5 trillion economy, $2.5 trillion in GDP. And if 20% is the savings, for argument's sake, then you have $0.5 trillion to create jobs, to invest these savings to create jobs. And if it costs you, 3 crore rupees to create a job, which is a capital intensive way of creating jobs, you can create 1 million jobs per year. Whereas the number of people entering employable age every year in India are between 10 and 12 million. And therefore, to create these number of jobs, you can afford only a much smaller capital of between 25 to 30 lakhs. So I'll just give you a very specific example. Like a Big Basket has raised certain capital from investors and has also created a certain number of jobs. Now, if you just take a simple division, if you divide the capital that we've raised by the number of jobs that we've created, it is roughly between 25 to 30 lakhs. So Big Basket in some ways is a microcosm of India in terms of jobs. And therefore, the way Big Basket is structured, the jobs mix at Big Basket is a reasonably accurate indicator of how India will look like. So Big Basket is 75 to 80% blue collar and between roughly 20% white collar. So I think India's economy eventually will stabilize at that, which is India will be a blue collar economy. We cannot aspire for the living standards of the Western world. Imagine 1.5 billion people aspiring to live like Americans. This planet will, in no time get completely eroded. So I think that's a reality that we all need to live with and need to accept. And therefore, once you accept, then you'll create the right kind of job. You won't make big announcements, that a Foxconn plant has been set up in Chennai, at 3 crore rupees per job, generating 1,000 jobs. Whereas we need 12 million jobs to be created. How do we create these 12 million jobs is what we must be talking about. In terms of reforms and policies, I am a little skeptical, because I don't think our problem is, reforms or policies. We don't need more reforms. We don't need more policies. We don't need a new education policy. The new education policy may be interesting, maybe, insightful, maybe attempting to do a few good things, but I think what we need is implementation. So I think, I've been with startups for the last 18 years. And one lesson I have learned, very, very clearly is that a few strategic choices, if you get them right, then you are all set, provided you execute on those strategic choices well. So I think we have already made some strategic choices well. 1991, we made a few right ones, 2014, and now just post-pandemic, we made a few ones right. But I think it's important to execute well. I think what has happened, in India post-independence is that those who, do business and those who regulate business, there has been an adversarial relationship on the ground. That adversarial relationship does not go away just by creating more reforms on paper, just by taking 44 codes and labor laws and saying we'll make them to 4 codes, does not change the ground reality. I think the ground reality needs to be changed. The relationship needs to be one of collaboration, not adversarial. There needs to be a clear distinction by the regulatory authorities on the ground between those contractors and employers who are deliberately violating the law, and those who are keen to maintain the law but make some technical violations. I think that's very important. I think it's this which makes all the difference. On the ground, how do you enable business? How do you make it easy for people to do business? How do you get out of their way? I am not at all bothered about supply side. So for example, people talk about skill development. Skill development is an answer. I don't think skill development is an answer at all. My belief is that you need to solve the demand side well. And the demand side can be solved by enabling entrepreneurs, getting out of their way, making their life easy, making licenses easy, supporting them, enabling them. Our MSME sectors, micro, medium, small, and enterprises should be completely given support. You need a cabinet minister who, takes their interest, takes their, side, argues for them, and does all of that. I think that is very critical. I'll give you a very specific example, right? If you tell people, go to villages and tell people, why don't you guys skill in driving? Go to Bangalore, go to Mumbai, go to Chennai, sign up in a driving school, pay money and develop the skills. People will laugh at you because there is no job at the end of, getting the driving license. But once you had Ola, Uber, and many of these taxi aggregation companies, people voluntarily began coming from the hinterland into the cities in India, voluntarily signed up for driving schools, and voluntarily, began getting driving licenses. So upskilling. So I think, a platform like this has created the demand for skill, pull for skill like no other push. And I think we should support companies like these rather than, at the slightest pretext come in their way and say, try to regulate the gig economy. Are these, businesses legal at all? So they're creating employment. I would say make life easy for them. They're creating, a pull for skills, which the push approach has never been able to solve. Take a company like Urban Clap, for instance, right? Urban Clap has brought, people who provide skills and people who demand for skills on the same platform. Earlier, if I had to discover a plumber, I would never have been able to find out who is a good plumber living in which part of the city. But today I go to Urban Clap, I know who is a good plumber. And because at the end of every service that a plumber provides, a rating is provided by the customer. So better ratings means more business. So plumbers will automatically go and upskill. They will learn how to do plumbing better. So these platforms and these businesses are providing such an impetus to skilling that the push approach completely failed. So that's my view. I think India does not need more reforms. I think we need implementation on the ground. We need honest implementation. We need a friendly, collaborative relationship between the regulators of business and those who are doing business. And coming to the last thing, I think is about big and small. I think Mr. Maira touched upon this. He talked extensively about, Schumacher's book. So I've been a great fan and admirer of Schumacher. I've been a great admirer of, Mr. Maira himself. But I think it is never a debate about, big or small. It has to be both. I think big has played its role. The globalization has been helpful. I think what we count as development, so far as advancement of humanity to a large extent is all about globalization. So I think, technology, people have wondered whether it has taken away jobs or created jobs. There's a debate so often about this. I think technology has been the biggest job creation engine in the history of mankind. It has created far more jobs than it has taken away. People will wonder, dynamite came, therefore will people who are, digging the land manually, will they lose their jobs? Of course not, because dynamite helped you to build Suez Canal, Panama Canal, Bhakra Nangal Dam. It helped you to do things that you could never have done before. So I think bigness has solved problems. It is the big industry that has helped clothe the world. Otherwise, all of us would not be clothed. Cotton mills, development of the spinning jennies helped bring the cost of clothing so low that all of us were able to, get clothed. But having said that, I think there is a place for small. It's a pandemic like this that once in a while makes us realize, is globalization an answer for everything? Does it have some unintended consequences? Should we deal with some of these unintended consequences? And I think the world has begun to deal with some of these unintended consequences. So for example, like supply chain, should we be so vulnerable as to depend upon one country called China? I think global supply chains are getting disaggregated. Many countries and companies are moving away from China and relocating these facilities to some other country as part of business continuity. Foxconn has opened up a plant in Chennai. Samsung is moving away from China. So you can see some deconstruction of the global supply chains. And I'm really worried about the food supply chains. I think what has happened in the last 30, 40 years is that the food supply chains have become truly global. And a few companies in the world, a few food companies, processing companies, control the entire food industry, as a result of which the world has become extremely vulnerable. Pathogens can very quickly get in from animals into the livestock, into the human population, and spread. What used to happen when it was local was that if any infection happened, it would get contained. Now it just does not get contained. Global food supply chains COVID free, and COVID is a metaphor. It does not necessarily mean COVID, but it's about any kind of infection. So how do you introduce some degree of resilience and some degree of safety into global food chains, food supply chains? I think that's clearly coming. At Big Basket, there's been a very tailwind for us. Demand went through the roof. We figured out how to deal with it. We figured out how to get more with less. We made changes in processes, changes in technology. Social distancing, has changed the way people look at business, the way they shop. They prefer, online commerce. So all of that has been very positive for us. Let's see real estate, for example. We don't know what's going to happen to real estate because offices are staffed only 10 to 15%. And I don't think in the next 2 years, you'll have more than 20% of people in the offices. But I'm sure, companies like, even Big Basket, 80% of the people necessarily need to go to the office, but employees in corporate won't go to the office for the next 1 year, 1.5 years. So I think it is going to hit real estate in a big way. And even cities itself, I think the way cities have developed, why is Bangalore what it is? Why is Singapore what it is? It's because of the interactions between people, of the way cities enable interactions, the way cities enable businesses to happen. If all that changes, why do you need the kind of cities that you have? I think, Ritu, you keep on saying India has very few 1 million plus cities, right? So we should have more big than 61 million plus cities. Yeah. But maybe I think we are realizing that we need more and more smaller cities at this point of time. So broadly, this is my thoughts, Ritu. With this, I'll give it back to you.
Thank you so much. In all honesty, I have another 10 odd questions that I had to ask, but I'm also cognizant of the fact that it's a Friday evening. We are already touching 5 o'clock. And there are some great questions which have come in even from YouTube and on the Q&A section, but I'm really sorry, but I don't think we have time for it. However, I'd like to first and foremost, thank each and every one of you, Mr. Maira, Mr. Unnikrishnan, Brajeshji, Hari, Mr. Sriram. I think we have many questions still unanswered in this particular topic. And I'm in a way happy that I get a chance to get you all back together, maybe again in a few months to have finished that conversation. I'm sure a lot of things, perspectives have changed.
Yeah.
I think COVID has definitely exposed, while it has exposed our underlying conditions, it has also exposed some of the plumbing that has gone into this country, because of which today we can sit and do this conference, let's say, virtually from our home. The amount of digital assets and capital that has been put in this country is very much visible. I'm sure there's a lot more to be done. The fact that while certain sectors have been hampered, there were other emerging sectors which have been able to stay alive, generate employment, is in itself a great thing. And I think the diversity landscape of India definitely had helped us. Otherwise, maybe the impact of COVID would have been far worse than it is. Looking towards the future, we stay positive at this point of time, but I agree with all of you. One common theme which I've heard is we know what we need to do. We have great plans. The trick is in execution. So yes, I think now we all have to put our heads together and ensure that through collaboration, execution happens. Thank you so very much, gentlemen. Can't thank you enough.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you all. Thanks.
Namaskar.
Bye.
Namaskar.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Maira.
Bye.